350 years. Well planned operation. Man, shipping lanes are being deepened and any obstructions, like shipwrecks, need to be moved.
I'm Frank Pope. I'm a marine archaeologist. I've studied shipwrecks all my life. I'm going to be with these men as they attempt to salvage wreckage from the riverbed. They know where the wrecks are, but they have no idea what they're going to find.
This is part of a ship that went down in World War I.
The bridgeman was saying, well, it's a little bit heavy, but look at that.
Yeah, that's right. We've got half a dozen be there, really.
This boat sank in the 1800s.
That's utterly fantastic, isn't it? That is a far better result than I expected.
And there's a 17th century warship.
We've got something big. We've got something very big.
Historian Tessa Dunlop will help me uncover these stories, meeting the experts and relatives behind these remarkable ships. From restoring Charles II to the throne to one of the great ships of empire. And stories of ordinary men and women who helped keep us free during World War II. This is the story of the Thames, its shipwrecks, and a race against time.
If you'd asked me how many wrecks there were in the Thames, I'd have thought, I don't know, maybe 100. I'd have been completely wrong, though, because out here in the Thames, there are over 600 shipwrecks.
A dive team from the Port of London Authority sets out to investigate some of these shipwrecks. On board is a team from Wessex Archaeology. Their job is to decide which wrecks need to be lifted. "10,000 container ships arrived in London last year, and bigger ones are planned. So the channel has to be deepened. Some of these ships have only half a metre between them and the riverbed, and lots of wrecks are in the way. So the archaeologists have to move in before the wrecks are destroyed. They're hoping to find details about the ships, personal items, and hopefully rescue something from the bottom. If they think there's something worth lifting, they can call in a salvage craft to help. Anything they find, however small, might help them understand these wrecks better and the history behind them. This is the front line of salvage archaeology.
There a current, Kev? No, it's slack up top.
Stuart Leather from Wessex Archaeology is in charge. And they're doing it all against the clock. With marine archaeology so expensive, they can't lift everything. They have limited time on each wreck. Clearance work is ready to begin later in the year. This is their last chance. We're interested in 4 of the wrecks they're looking at. A great warship from the 17th century, a mystery boat about which little is known, and 2 ships that sank during World War II. And this is a computerized view of what one of them looks like underwater. The Aisha, a 100-foot yacht that hit a German mine in October 1940.
Here we have the wreck of the Aisha. Right, and as you can see, it doesn't look particularly ship-shaped.
Doesn't at all. I can't see a ship there at all.
And that's because the Aisha hit a mine, and you can see that it's just scattered debris over the seabed. Let's just look at the sort of the dimensions, really, of the area that the wreck covers. Well, if we draw the profile across here, it's about just over 50 metres, 60 metres, okay? And if we go in the other direction, it's the same sort of dimensions, about, well, just over 60 metres.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but on this one, we're not going to find any big bits of wreckage. I mean, this is in bits and pieces, right?
It really does look like just a scattered debris on the seabed.
From looking at this data, the archaeologists can tell where they need to go. They know it's unlikely they'll find much more than small broken pieces of metal. But diving on the Aisha gives them a chance to look at one of the smaller wrecks of World War II. This is a rare opportunity to look at a World War II wreck in the Thames. Their last chance salvage work is also a challenging task, because working in the Thames is difficult. Time is against them. There are powerful currents which mean they can only work safely underwater in the short period between the tide going out and coming back in again. Sometimes that's just 30 or 40 minutes.
Have you got any visitors, Sam?
No, it's visible on the way down, but nothing now down here.
And then there's the problem with visibility underwater. There just isn't any.
It was dark. The water's very, very cloudy. Once you get about 3 meters down or so, you lose the light, and then when you get to the bottom, it's absolutely pitch black. It was a strange garden, and somebody put a blindfold on me and sent me out the back door and said, you know, go and pick me a rose. You know, not just any old rose, say a white rose. It would be a bit like that.
The Thames has always played a pivotal role in British history. It's prior to London. It's been the centre of trade for an empire, and it's been a battlefield. And no more so than in the Second World War, when the nation's fate was played out here in the estuary.
The river's always been central to the holding of power. This is the most direct route to the capital, and for thousands of years, right back to the time of the Romans, invaders have been coming up the river intent on making trouble. The last time this happened was in the Second World War, when the Germans identified the river as a key target.
Thames estuary is very vulnerable. It's extremely wide, it's easy to get into, and absolutely everything has to come through there. It's a pinch point. It doesn't matter how far you disperse your shipping, they've all got to come together to go into the river estuaries, which means there's a big cluster and a big concentration of ships. A directive is given by Adolf Hitler to Hermann Göring to begin the siege of England, and at this point far more resources are directed into trying to paralyse coastal shipping than have been used before. And what this then develops into is the first stage of the Battle of Britain, which is known to the Germans as the Canal Camp for the Battle of the Channel. And this is a direct assault on coastal convoys, coastal shipping passing up and down the English Channel and in the Thames estuary.
And so the Luftwaffe's bombers began to pour across the Channel. Their route to London was up the Thames. Take the Thames, and they take London. Take London, and they take the country. So we built these. These enormous forts are called Monceau forts, and several of them were built across the Thames at the start of the war. Now they're haunting-looking wrecks themselves, towering above the water, standing as a reminder of the last time people tried to invade the British Isles. But the front line of the battle on the river was here. Just meters underneath this water are the remains of the Aisha. She was a harbour defence patrol craft of the Royal Navy and sank in October 1940 when she hit a mine. But the Aisha started life as a luxury yacht.
Everybody's heard of the little ships that went to Dunkirk, but thousands more of these little ships, and sometimes quite big ones, were called up from private owners for use all around the coast. The Aisha was one of these ships. She was a private yacht. She was called into service. They would clamp a gun on her and maybe some rudimentary anti-submarine equipment, and she became a harbour defence patrol boat, which means they paint her grey and she steams up and down outside the entrance to probably Sheerness or other ports on the south coast.
On the river, a diver is heading down to the wreck of the Aisha.
I've already got debris down here on some sort of steel structure.
Okay then, mate, just have a good look round.
Roger that.
16 meters down, he'll be working against the clock, in the dark, trying to feel his way towards and around the Aisha. He knows there are pieces sticking out of the riverbed, so he's trying to find them. Once he's in the water, all the others can do is wait. But what do we actually know about the Aisha? Working with me to uncover the stories behind the wrecks is historian Tessa Dunlop. Her first stop is Lloyd's Register, in the heart of London.
Yes, here they are. This is the Lloyd's Register of yachts, and you can see that they're very comprehensive right up until 1939. Then, of course, war broke out, so they ceased to be published. I presume a bit of a security risk. But here's the 1939 copy. Now, we know that the Asia was blown up by a mine in 1940. 1940 record, of course, wasn't published, which means her last entry should be in this journal. Amy, the Asia. There she is, entry number 80. It says here, ex Wilna. So clearly, she'd been bought by a new owner and renamed the Asia. It wasn't her original name. And then, keep going along the columns, we find her owner in 1939, an R.H. Turner.
And this is Robert Turner. He bought the boat in 1939, just before the war, when she was named the Wilna. Tessa managed to find his son Peter, who can tell us more about his father.
Peter, what kind of a man was your father?
He was a very kind and generous man who was born in Rochdale in Lancashire, of a cotton-producing family, and he moved down to Surrey when he was probably rich enough to start a large family. And I think my father wanted to do a bit more entertaining, but at sea, and he bought the steel-hulled ship Wilna, it was called at that time.
Oh, yes.
I've got a photograph of it.
Oh yes, you can see the name.
Yep.
Here we have the Wilna. This is
Here
she,
we are,
is
here
it?
we
This
are.
is her. Oh, wow. What did your father do with his free time?
Apart from working hard and playing hard, he enjoyed entertaining. In fact, I've got a record of war years in his own visitor's book.
So he didn't hold back his socialising.
No. After the Earl of Warwick, we see Doreen Niven, Max Niven, and David Niven, the actor who had...
The David Niven.
The David Niven, who had left Hollywood to do his bit for the British forces.
And the Asia, by this stage, had actually been seconded by His Majesty's forces.
They were wanted for naval service, if you like. Sure. And I recall hearing that my mother was absolutely distraught when she heard that Asia had been painted battleship grey on the outside and on the inside as well, covering up all the lovely mahogany woodwork.
That's really mean, isn't it? Especially when clearly so much effort had gone into
Yes.
making her look the
Yeah,
part.
yes.
Little did she know it was going to be sunk anyway within a matter of months.
Yes. Well,
Really quite sad.
that was amazing.
The Aisha was a much-loved luxury boat in her day, used for entertaining the rich and famous. Now a wrecked warship, she lies beneath the Thames. "16 meters below the surface, a diver is working on the Aisha. He's only got 20 minutes left before the tide turns and he's got to get out. In the darkness, he's found something substantial.
But it's obviously quite a large lump of steel.
Do you want to go out, have a go at recovering it?
It's the heaviest and the biggest thing I've found so far. And I mean, I wouldn't like to say how big it is. Underneath the bed, obviously.
The job now is to decide how to get it up. The Port of London team decide to send down a strop, a heavy cable to put around the metal.
So they're going to attach this big wire to it. They're going to
So the strop's attached to here, and then they're going to...
Yeah, that's right. They take it off the strop now, like you see. Then they're going to bring it over the bow, and they'll get a straight lift. So they'll be able to get a lot more tension, a lot more force.
And then we'll just have to pick it around the front.
Yeah, then they'll... I don't know what they'll do then.
Tug
They
it
may
round.
could use the crane to bring it to actually lift it on board once it's sort of.
Because we've got something big.
We've got something big. We've got something very big.
We hadn't expected something big. The Aisha had been hit by a German mine, so small twisted bits of metal was about the best we could hope for. Anything could be on the other end.
The Aisha is one of the forgotten wrecks of the Second World War, and she opens up one of the great untold stories of that war. It's about Dad's Navy, the maritime equivalent of Dad's Army.
This is HMS Europa, a training base in Lowestoft. It was the home of the Royal Naval Patrol Service. 70,000 men served with the RNPS on over 6,000 boats. These were all small boats, trawlers, fishing boats, tugs and yachts, all pressed into service, just like the Aisha. And its crews were fishermen, weekend sailors, in fact, anyone with experience on the water. They all went to HMS Europa to do a basic training session.
Most of them were reservists, and what that meant was that they had joined the Navy in between the wars as a reservist and done a few weeks training every year. But this is wartime, there's no frills, this is pretty basic training, it's not very long. They are turned from civilian to sailor in a matter of weeks, and a lot of learning how to do their job properly, they have to learn on the job.
Charlie Harris was a fisherman who went through HMS Europa before he was sent for duty on minesweepers. He was one of thousands.
Where everybody from all over the country all came in different occupations, what they wanted to go in for. Some were seamen, some were stokers, some were enginemen, cooks, stewards, signalmen, telegraphists. Some fishermen were in each ship with other people who didn't know quite so much, and then they got as good as anybody else eventually. That was the general idea of mixing everybody up together. We're part of the Royal Navy, there's no doubt about that, but because we were a little bit more scruffier, should I say, putting it quite plainly. I don't mean we didn't do a job, because they did a hell of a good job.
Crewmen like Charlie, on boats like the Aisha, kept the Thames and London secure. So who were the crewmen of the Aisha? Tessa's been trying to find out, and her research led her to a man whose father was on the Aisha. This is William Fletcher.
He didn't talk a lot about his wartime experiences, but what I do know is he did serve on a ship called the Aisha. When I was sorting through my mother's belongings, I came across a photograph of which he'd written HMS Aisha.
June 1940.
Yes.
And here we have her now. Interestingly, here she is in her battleship grey.
Yes, yes.
Dreary grey colour.
And the gun on the bow, yes.
To be honest, like a bit of a wreck.
Doesn't look that attractive, does it?
No, really bleak.
No. Also, you know, with the photographs was this cut-in. Obviously, he's written Aisha at Dunkirk, which shows a small Aisha alongside the larger ships. And I do know that he was on board the Aisha when it took part in the Dunkirk evacuation. I mean, I recall watching a television program with him of the Dunkirk evacuation, and it was mentioned a rather large troop ship which actually was hit and unfortunately destroyed, and he did say he was quite close by to that, and it was quite a memorable experience.
But for the grace of God, it could have
Indeed,
been,
yes, yes.
Such a lottery, wasn't it?
Because I guess the small boats like the Aisha sort of ferried the soldiers from the beaches to the larger ships. Sunnycoat might well have been right alongside this large ship when it was hit.
The evacuation at Dunkirk was a huge operation. In May 1940, almost 340,000 men were lifted off the beach in 900 vessels.
At Dunkirk, what you've got are regular Royal Navy warships. You've got auxiliary vessels that have been taken into service, like the Aisha, which has got a naval reserve crew on board. And then you've got privately owned vessels with their original crews on board that volunteered for this. So different kinds of British seafarer, all doing the same basic job. They're all there to get the army off the beach and get it back home. The Navy actually carries most of the people away, but the presence of those small ships shows that it's a national effort. It's not just the official government operation, it's the entire country is mobilized. This is a time of national emergency. Everybody is involved. The entire seafaring community is tied into this.
The Aisha was part of what Churchill described as the miracle of Dunkirk. But 5 months later, at the height of the Battle of Britain, the Aisha sank. She was hit by a mine. It was one of thousands laid by the Germans as they tried to cut off the entrance to the Thames estuary.
Now, archaeologists diving beneath the Thames are hoping to find parts of the ship, and they think they've got something.
Oh, it's bigger than that.
The surface team send down a huge cable to haul it up. But what it is, and from which part of the ship, is still a mystery. As it emerges from the water, it looks like metal, but that's about all we can say.
So the ice has been down there for 70 years, and though the divers have been touching it, this is the first time anyone's seen the Aisha for that entire time. So it's really quite a moment.
At this stage, I'm really not sure what it is, but it's incredibly it's obviously a bit of metal. You've got rivet holes or bolt holes through it. You can see where it's been buried.
Yeah,
But not with a skip.
Big ships are passing us now, and the diver's running out of time. More cable goes down, and more metal comes back up. 3 big pieces. Eventually, the diver makes it back to the dive boat. Time's run out. The tide has turned. As we head back, Stuart and I have a chance to look at what's come up.
So we've got 3 lovely bits of the Aisha here. Now,
Isn't it phenomenal?
What can we say?
Well, I'll tell you what, should we see how long it is?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that'll get us started anyway. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
5 frank calibrated paces, that's 5 metres. So that
meters.
actually corresponds to the width of the vessel.
Yeah, almost exactly.
Almost
Yeah,
exactly
right.
to the width of the vessel. So that would suggest that this could be some form of deck beam supporting the deck running across the vessel.
So like this, yeah.
That's right. Or it could be part of superstructure, a bit like the wheelhouse we've got there, something supporting that sort of construction there. Right, okay, here we go.
Wow.
Look at this bit.
Quite regular, isn't it?
It is regular, and it doesn't look as though it's been ripped off, from another adjoining piece, But, hey, you never know, but it could also be a bulkhead.
Sort of Titanic style.
Titanic
separate
style,
the
yeah,
ship.
absolutely. Forming that separation from within the ship's hull, watertight compartments, all that sort of thing, different
I like
rooms.
that.
It all would have been done using sort of this type of sheet material.
And this could still be contortion from a mine blast.
Absolutely, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
after the forces exerted from that blast, everything loses its shape, and it's very difficult to start piecing pieces back together again.
3 rusty bits of metal are all we can now see from the Aisha. A small boat with a real history, it's rare to get a chance to salvage something like this. After some investigation, Stuart's team discover what this piece is. It was part of the flooring in the cabin. On top of this lump of metal had been a beautiful teak floor, part of the luxurious ship so loved by Peter Turner and his family.
It looks like the perfect place to entertain.
The Aisha hit a mine. Mines were one of the biggest problems on the river during the war. Hundreds of ships went down.
But mines were not the only problem. Convoys carrying precious cargo like coal were prime targets for German air attacks. And that's the case of our next wreck from the river. It's the Letchworth, a coal boat from Newcastle, which gives us access to another untold story from the war.
By this stage in the war, you've got an immensely complex network that's been developed around the coast. There aren't really that many ships that you can use, and this system has been developed to protect them and also to make sure that you get the maximum, most efficient use out of every hull. So you have convoys coming down, they're southbound convoys, in one lane along the coast, and they're in the inside lane because they're the valuable hulls, they're full. You have convoys going back up, trying to get empty ships back safely to the north where they can be filled. They're on the outside lane because they're fractionally less valuable.
Among the most valuable cargoes travelling by convoy was coal, being brought in from the northeast.
The Letchworth is a typical collier. She's a couple of thousand tons and she's coming down in a convoy from the north of England full of coal. And in the Thames estuary, she is unlucky enough to be one of the last victims actually of a massed German air attack.
The Letchworth was one of thousands of ordinary boats doing a vital job. She sank late at night, and all her crewmen ended up in the water of the Thames.
The ship goes down, they're in lifeboats for a while, they swim ashore. They end up being taken to Southend Pier in the middle of the night, soaking wet and covered in oil.
It broke into pieces and just sank nevertheless.
Tessa's researchers came up with a recording of one of the survivors of the attack on the Letchworth.
That looks like a lifeboat.
This is Robert Stoves describing what happened to him.
And as I went down with sea boots on and life jacket and everything else, I came shot up in amongst all this fuel oil. 2 or 3 were shouting, "Help, help, I can't swim, we're off." And now a lifeboat eventually came off from Southend and picked us up and took us ashore, by which time it was dark, and the railway line on the pier at Southend is electrified. And all the chappie ahead of us were saying, "Mind your feet, don't touch that rail, don't touch that rail, it's electrified." In the middle of the night, there was no lights at all. But that was the end of the Letchworth.
There's absolutely no visibility underwater here. It's pitch black, and you just can't see the Letchworth. But there is one place where there's a wreck that looks a bit like it, and it's in South Devon.
I want to feel connected to our wrecks, and the best way of doing that is to dive a similar one. So a few weeks ago, I went there and dived it. It's called the Britannia, and it sank in 1918.
Wow. Yeah, these huge bits of machinery. At 1,300 tons, she's a little bit smaller than the Letchworth, but you can still get a sense of its enormous scale. There's such a lot of space on this ship. It would have just been full of coal. Like the Letchworth, she was a huge collier. I think this is the coal now. It's just staggeringly sun. What you gotta understand, it's just huge. In the days before electricity pylons, it's this cargo of coal that was the national grid. You've got to imagine 60 of these ships in line coming up the Thames. Now they would have been meeting another 60 ships coming the other way. Imagine 120 ships on the Thames. They would have dwarfed everything else. My God. You can imagine the little Aisha, plucky little thing defending this ship.
Ships like the Letchworth and the Aisha were crewed by ordinary men, the unsung heroes of the war on the Thames. Tessa's investigations threw up a list of those who were on the Aisha when she sank. They all survived that sinking, but in the library at Lowestoft, Tessa discovered that they didn't necessarily survive the war.
William Fletcher, Flynn, Fogg, Fuller, Big Fisher, Gibson, nothing there. Frank Greening. There's a Gibbon. Although you've got him there that looks at it as the Aisha, he actually was lost at sea on the Southern Flower.
Losses on the coast to both the merchantmen and the naval escorts that are supporting them are absolutely enormous. By the end of 1940, there's over 800 ships being sunk in British coastal waters. Now, most of these are on the east coast and in the Channel. By and large, nobody went into this war expecting it to be easy, and they expected to take losses. I think probably the hardest thing to deal with was that theirs was a largely forgotten war, and these losses were taking place without the public really being aware of what was going on. Especially in those early years, there weren't many good stories coming out of the coast. This was not something that could be spun positively for propaganda purposes, but equally it wasn't something that could be stopped. So the convoys had to keep running, and the losses had to be swallowed up.
Over 17,000 Royal Naval Patrol servicemen died during the war, and more than 1,400 ships were lost due to enemy action. Back on the Thames, the divers have examined the wreck of the Letchworth and are happy that it won't cause any problems to passing ships. They've decided not to lift any of it. So she's going to remain where she went down, and a buoy will mark her position. The Letchworth may be just another collier, but historically she lets us see into the world of the forgotten heroes of World War II. Men like William Fletcher, Charlie Harris, and Robert Stokes. 3 miles north of Sheerness lies another wreck. It's a bit of a mystery. They know it's wooden, and a previous dive brought up some bricks, but that's about it. Imaginatively, it's been named the Brick Barge.
We can see that actually it'd be quite easy to miss this, because this is just an isolated lump in an area just on the edge of the channel where you can see there's shallower here, then going down and getting deeper, and we've got this little lump here. Right, and it's slightly anomalous, isn't it? It doesn't really look like the rest of the riverbed. It does stick out. And this is the Brick Barge. And the reason we've called it the Brick Barge is
Looks
because
like a brick.
No, not quite, but a valid attempt there, Frank. But we have actually sent divers down, and they've actually recovered bricks, and they've confirmed that it's from a wooden barge-like vessel.
Okay.
We can get some dimensions of this.
How big is the brick?
Well, so the brick is sort of 15 metres long. Yeah, something like that.
Right, okay.
Right, with a width
That's
of
amazing.
about sort of, 6 metres. So pretty barge-like.
And so the dive team heads out to investigate the Brick Barge. This wreck intrigues them. Could it be an old Thames barge? What might it have been carrying as cargo? And what were bricks doing on it? Right now, all they know is there's something made of wood on the riverbed. They wait for the tide, then the diver goes down. As always, he'll have less than an hour to try to salvage something from this wreck. His first target is to try to find out more about the cargo. This might help date the wreck. Pretty soon a bag makes it to the surface, and it's full of yet more bricks. But can these bricks tell us anything about the wreck itself?
These aren't just normal bricks, are they?
Well, they're very specific bricks, Frank. We can tell a lot from these bricks. We've got frogging in these bricks.
Oh, yes.
Right, and the frog was designed to take the mortar.
A bit more grip.
Bit more grip. And this is dated to around 1850. Frogs sort of first came in.
Right.
Prior to that time, bricks were flat. Right, so again, it's pushing this into the sort of 19th century of the wreck sinking.
And the colour's extraordinary. This is bright yellow.
The colour tells us a lot, right? It tells us where these bricks were manufactured, basically. And these bricks were manufactured in Kent. It was really only the Kent brickworks that produced this sort of golden coloured brick.
I see, okay.
Right, so if we know that the bricks came from Kent, if we put that together with the location of the shipwreck, which is sort of in the Thames estuary, en route to London, we can actually start saying that this was a load of bricks destined for London.
So the colour of these bricks firmly place them as being from brickworks in Kent.
Some lettering.
Bricks that built London's suburbs have been made there for hundreds of years. But there's also another thing. These black specks are ash. Bricks made from ash come from one part of Kent, the Medway area, and give us a date for the bricks as mid-19th century.
It was from this part of Kent that the bricks were loaded by hand onto vast numbers of barges, and they were perfectly placed, of course, to then scuttle up to London, because it's where the Medway meets the Thames, And there they were unloaded and basically used as the staple building blocks of the world's biggest port. This was the international port of London.
When you look at the Kent and Essex sort of areas, I mean, one of the main trades for both of them, but in particular for North Kent, a little bit also for North Essex, was of course the manufacture of stock bricks for the London market. So areas around the Medway in particular, Faversham, Sittingbourne, there were a large number of very, very modern brick fields which had grown up really in the 19th century. They had short row links very often to their own docks, and sailing barges could get into these areas very, very easily. These big flat-bottomed boats could get there, and then they could bring these bricks back to London to help feed the massive expansion of suburban London, which takes off dramatically, really, from the 1830s sort of onwards.
With Kent bricks building London, we've at least solved one mystery of the brick barge. But is there any way we can prove that it was actually a barge? That's going to take more work. In 2003, divers working in the Thames found a remarkable ship. This vessel dates from 1574 and was a merchant sailing ship. It had to be lifted as it was in one of the main shipping channels. Wrecks as old as this are rare in the Thames, but there is one very close to the new shipping channel. It was one of the mainstays of Oliver Cromwell's navy.
Just over there in the water behind me is one of the most important shipwrecks in the entire Thames estuary. She's so important, they diverted the shipping channel to avoid interfering with her. The HMS London was a warship with 68 guns on board. She launched in 1657, but sank only 8 years later. In those 8 years, she led the most incredible life. The sinking of the London was a national catastrophe. 300 people died in a huge explosion on board. The HMS London was an important warship.
She was one of the newest and largest and most powerful ships in Cromwell's navy, built in 1656. She carried somewhere between 64 and 80 guns, according to the needs of the time, and had a crew, a ship's company, in the order of 460 sailors. So this is quite a major floating operation. London was one of a group of ships that was the most valuable, the most useful for leading fleets. So she would serve as the flagship of a squadron, either commanding in the Downs or in a major fleet on expedition overseas.
She was built by the order of Oliver Cromwell, who just emerged victorious from a period of bloody civil war. He was intent on developing a new navy for his Republican Britain and understood that increased military might at sea would help him consolidate his position both at home and abroad.
This is a very strong fighting ship. She's tall and squat. She's not very long, but she's very vertical. Lots of guns, all packed together. It's not elegant. It's big, tough. It's a prop forward of the fleet.
Divers from Wessex Archaeology are heading out to dive the HMS London. They need to find out how far this historic and important wreck is dispersed over the site. They want to make sure that none of its remains, its cannons, or the graves of those who died are going to be disturbed by the new big ships. So the divers are checking whether any of it is causing an obstruction and whether they'll need to lift anything from the river bottom.
Your task is to go down the anchor line, establish yourself on the seabed. I want you to watch out all around the site. We really need to know how big it, exactly how big it is, because this multi-beam image is obviously only focusing on things that are sticking up from the seabed.
10 meters below the surface, the diver is feeling his way around. After 40 minutes or so, he's back with a small piece of timber from the HMS London.
A lot of the timber down there, well, it certainly feels like this, very eroded, and bits just come off like that, so it's hard to tell. There's lots of bits that are, you know, could be almost a metre upstanding, and like I said, a lot of them are too eroded to say whether that could be a frame of a vessel or a plank of a vessel, but in some places you can feel definite planks, definite, you know, you can feel the long linear shape and the thickness, you know it's plank.
This isn't the first time the HMS London has been dived. In fact, she was dived in 1665, just after she sank. Diving in England was in its infancy, but the London was seen as a hugely important ship, so the latest technology was used.
The divers are hindered in their work by the fact that the storms and weather and because of the conditions, they can only dive for 3 days. But what they would also have been doing would be they'd have been dragging nets behind them, like a fishing net, and scooping in everything that they could. They found 18 cannon, such as culverins and demi-culverins. They also brought up various things such as the main top mast, part of that, they brought that up. They brought up hawsers, the ropes, they brought up guy ropes, they brought up gunwales squared at the top, which had come off part of the ship. So it was mainly a lot of the wood that would have formed part of the ship's hull.
More recently, these cannons were recovered from the site. When the London sank, there were 90 of them on board. This was a supreme fighting machine. And these are some more finds from the HMS London, recovered by Port of London Authority divers.
Look at this. Absolutely fantastic. Let's look at the musket first there. But if we just pick that up,
that's a shame, but look at it. Such solid wood.
You can see it's actually beautifully crafted, isn't it? And obviously this bit here, Frank, is where the flintlock would have been housed and the trigger system, right, as they had the barrel going in here, yeah. So it gives you a real feel of what this musket would have been like.
And firing it?
You've got that on your shoulder, taking aim, lighting it, and the musket going off. I've never fired a musket, and I really don't fancy it because there would have been smoke and sparks everywhere. But an incredible, that gives you a feel for what a musket's like, really, isn't it? It's beautiful.
Yeah, and while we're on the subject of guns, this is a wheel, as we think from the gun carriage. It's actually an integral part of the gun.
Absolutely, yeah. Without the carriage, you know, you wouldn't have been able to do anything from the gun, because you've got to remember that these cannons were loaded from the barrels. So as you wheel them out through the gun port and the gun goes off, you then got to reload, so you've got to wheel them back in again, turn them round, then throw down all the wadding and gunpowder and put the ball in, tamp all that down and then wheel them out again. So you can imagine that without this piece, without the wheels and the gun carriage, you won't be able to manoeuvre the gun around.
Right. This is a whole different deal. God, it's heavy.
Oh my word, it is heavy. This is a Deadeye. So what we've got, this is the way up it would have been. This would have been pointing up towards the mast, right, with a single cable coming out here, single wire or rope. Yeah, and then this would have gone down, then you have had 3 ropes. This is what these are. You can see it's beautifully smooth. That's where the rope's been running through here. Yeah, looping through, and that would have been tied down on either to another set of Deadeyes or indeed to the hull of the ship. This is a small Deadeye, but actually it represents a massive rigging, a scale of propulsion, if you like, with sort of 3 masts driving this vessel along with maybe 100 men actually manoeuvring and sailing the boat in a war situation to make sure she was in the best position, getting her strategically in a position where she could fire her broadside. And as that broadside goes together and the ships come together, that's when the small arms fire comes in. So all these components really work together to turn this into the fighting machine that she was.
So this whole lot, it just screams big fighting warship.
She's a substantial part of Cromwell's navy, which he had built up deliberately, and which had become the most powerful navy in the world by the time she was built, by the late 1650s. And she's there in the Baltic in 1659, showing the flag, you know, kind of gunboat diplomacy, keeping the Dutch and the Danes and the Swedes in their proper place. She's taking part in an amphibious operation against Maerdijk in the Spanish Netherlands, which is now part of modern Belgium. Cromwell had gone to war against Spain in alliance with the French, and a French military force was attacking the town by land, and the English Navy comes in close ashore, the London acting as the flagship. And for 3 days in succession, this English fleet bombard the defences from the sea to soften up the defences, to make the land operation that much easier. And it succeeds. Mardyke surrenders within a matter of days and is actually handed over to England as part of the Anglo-French political arrangement. And as far as we know, that was the only time that the London fires its guns in anger.
Close to the HMS London lies the wreck nicknamed the Brick Barge. The divers have already brought bricks to the surface. They suggest that the wreck might be mid-Victorian, about 150 years old. At the end of this umbilical line is the diver, 11 meters down. He's asked for a line to be sent down, a strop, so that he can attach a section of the boat to it. It's a piece of wood, but because it's pitch black down there, he can't say what it is.
Well, they've obviously got something, Frank, because the strops are going in.
Looks like a lot more heavy. I thought
It does, yeah.
a few scraps of wood, but it looks like they got something serious.
No, that was a half-ton strop there that they've just put in the water.
Half-ton strop?
Yeah, that's rather nice. That's rather nice. So they've obviously got something pretty serious down there. I always get a bit envious when I see strops going in the water. That's the time when I want to be diving again.
You like your strops?
Yeah, I like the strops. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Decent shackles. I'm more of a shackle man.
You're more of a shackle man,
like
yeah.
nice shackle.
No, I'm with you. Yeah. Game of patience to see what's going to come out of the water now.
Fascinating. You know, we've got the umbilical snaking down there, disappearing about half a foot underneath the surface.
That's right.
The same with the messenger line and just a few bubbles.
With the strops finally attached, the lift starts. But there's a problem.
Stop.
The strops come off. The section of wood is bigger than we thought.
That's right. It's like the one that got away, Frank.
A muddy strop.
A muddy strop indeed. Yes. Well, I think we're going to go down for another go. So that's all good. It's all good. So we'll give it another go, and hopefully we'll be more fortunate this time.
The weather's getting worse, but they can't leave whatever is there in the main shipping channel. So they try again. Time and the weather are against them. With time running out, they're on a last-ditch attempt. Eventually, something breaks the water's surface. It's certainly a big chunk of wood that's coming up. Sadly, this is the only part of the boat they'll be able to recover. As ever, they've run out of time. But is there anything about this wood that might prove to us that this is a barge?
That's utterly fantastic, isn't it? That is a far better result than I expected. That's just great.
How old do you think this is?
If it's a barge, which we think it is, it could have been built in the 1860s.
So we're talking, 150 years maybe.
150 years, definitely. And look at the condition of that timber. It's just phenomenal, isn't it? And you can also see all the fastening holes, the bolt holes, which have obviously clamped it together. And you can actually see some shaping and some moulding there in that timber. Well, look at this. This is just fantastic. Look, if I was to hazard a guess, we've got the side of the barge here, and I think this may well be the turn of the bilge with some bolt holes here running along it.
So what we've got here is the floor of the bottom of the boat meeting the side of the boat, is what you're telling me?
That's exactly, yeah, known as the turn of the bilge. That's what I think we're seeing. And these vessels were incredibly flat-bottomed.
Right.
And,
so
and
this
is
is
that angle.
perfect for working on the river. It's perfectly evolved because it allows it to skate over the sandbanks.
Exactly, to get through and get access to all the shallows and to move material from all parts of the creek.
Someone said that, the Thames barge can float on an early morning dew or a heavy morning dew, wasn't it?
Testament to the shallow draft of these vessels and that flat-bottom nature.
The way the side of this boat meets the bottom is exactly how barges are made. they have very flat hulls. So our section from the wreck proves that it was indeed a barge. And this is what it would have looked like. Thames barges were the workhorses of the Thames. They were the equivalent of today's long-haul truck. They're unique, with their ochre sails and flat bottoms that allow them to glide along. These little barges moved everything along the Thames. In their heyday, there were 2,000 of them on the river. Now, there's only a handful. The Thames weaves its way through London. The river leads us into the heart of the city and to the heart of government. For hundreds of years, political power has sat alongside the Thames, whether it be the powers held by Parliament or by the monarchy.
HMS London was built in Chatham at a time of great change. Charles II was in exile in The Hague. Oliver Cromwell was running the country as a Commonwealth, and we were at war with the Dutch.
But the future Charles II was actually in exile in Holland. He fled there after the Civil War. And the story of his return to England is the story of the HMS London's finest hour.
In the 1650s, the English Commonwealth, led by Oliver Cromwell, faced some serious problems. They were a regicide republic. All the crowned heads of Europe were against them. They faced the threat of a Stuart restoration, of a French invasion, possibly even a Dutch invasion. They were the outlaws. They were the bad guys. So they needed to be strong at sea. So Cromwell turns the money that he's taken from the king, from the nobility, and he turns it into power. And the London is one of those instruments of power. Big, strong, heavily armed warship.
Cromwell died in 1658, and without their leader and his son not up to the job, the country soon dissolved into chaos. It didn't take people long to realise that the exiled King Charles II needed to be restored to the throne.
In 1660, politics moved with amazing rapidity and took almost everyone by surprise, including the king. And he suddenly discovered he was now invited back to England to resume the crown, and a fleet went over to bring him back and to bring back the whole royal family, the court and all the attendants from Holland.
This is obviously the moment, if ever there was a moment, for the maximum prestige, maximum political show. This is when you need your biggest ships. And so they fit out the biggest ships in the fleet flagship, the Naseby, the London, the Richard, and sail across to the Dutch coast to collect the king.
And of course, on the Dutch side, there's an enormous gathering of not just the royal family and their attendants, but thousands of Dutch dignitaries. And for several days, there was endless banqueting, fireworks, formal dinners, speeches, and all the rest. And then the king and the dukes and so forth came on board. And then they all split up to come back on separate ships, so that the king comes back on the Royal Charles, and the London carries James, Duke of York, who is the king's younger brother, and a generation later becomes king himself as King James II.
The restoration of the Stuart monarchy demonstrates just how central the London is to the Navy. It's one of the most important ships in the fleet. On this expedition, it's the second most important ship. It brings the second most important passenger home. It really is a high-status, prestigious vessel. The connection with the monarchy and the connection with the City of London means it has enormous influence as a symbol of national power and of where the Navy sits in the national order.
The HMS London was part of the triumphant fleet that carried the king back up the river to reclaim the throne. It was an extraordinary moment. But only 5 years later, she was to come to a horrible and untimely end.
Unusually for a major warship of the 17th century, HMS London meets her end very dramatically, very quickly, and in the middle of piping times of peace. The ship is sailing out of the Medway into the Thames. They're firing salutes because the Admiral is coming on board. And rather like certain people around the world do today, the English were then in the habit of letting off guns whenever they were celebrating, kind of combination of firework and sound effect. But they had 90 very large guns to let off, so they were firing a lot of ammunition, and some idiot must have gone into the magazine with a candle, and blown the magazine up. So 10 tons of gunpowder, one lighted candle, large explosion, bottom falls out of the ship. When the smoke clears, there are 25 people standing on the quarterdeck, which is just above the waterline. Everything else is gone. The bottom has gone out of the ship. She's sunk in one cataclysmic explosion. Really is a striking and stunning demonstration of Stuart health and safety regulations being pretty lax.
Her captain was Vice Admiral John Lawson, one of the most important people in the Navy at the time. Lawson wasn't on board ship when it exploded. However, among the 300 dead were many people close to him.
One of the rather poignant bits about it is that there were 300 casualties, but among the crew, over 20 members of the crew were actually close relations of John Lawson, who was the captain. There was the ship's company is not just an anonymous gathering. There was a real sense of a company with close bonds, even family ties, on quite a large scale. So although he wasn't on board and wasn't affected, large numbers of his friends and relations were actually killed in that massive explosion.
The London was a much missed warship, even after such a short life.
London has two great moments in the spotlight. The operations between Sweden and Denmark. Very high prestige, very powerful symbol of what navies are really all about. Preventing wars, maintaining national interest, exerting the power of the English state overseas. And secondly, that glorious jamboree when they bring the Stuarts home. Very, very high status, celebratory moment in the history of the country.
She was one of the ships that made England a major naval power, perhaps the major naval power at that point.
The fact this wreck is still in existence, in effect, that we can actually get information and look at this wreck, means it's very important. It was actually part of the fleet that went to rescue Charles II from The Hague, and therefore, by definition, it's a significant wreck within our history.
But at the heart of the nation, ships coming up the Thames connect with every part of the country and every part of the world. The history of Britain and the Thames are intertwined. This summer, a remarkable event is taking place. In a race against time, archaeologists are trying to salvage what they can from ships that have sunk over the last 350 years. They lie in the middle of the busy shipping channel and have to be moved. It's one of the biggest marine archaeological projects ever run in the UK.
I'm Frank Pope. I'm a marine archaeologist. I've studied shipwrecks all my life. I'm going to be with these men as they attempt to salvage wreckage from the riverbed. They know where the wrecks are, but they have no idea what they're going to find.
Last time we told the story of a 17th century warship that helped restore Charles II to the throne, and of ships that helped keep us free during World War II. This time we unfold the story of one of the great sailing ships that crossed the globe.
I'm a bit speechless, actually. That's phenomenal, isn't it? That's, we've got half the Dovenby there, really.
We find personal possessions from an unknown wreck of the 1800s.
It makes you feel like, I don't know, dead man's shoes.
And lastly, we solve the puzzle of a site nicknamed the Pottery Wreck. Helping me uncover the stories behind these forgotten wrecks is historian Tessa Dunlop. This is the story of the Thames, its shipwrecks, and a race against time.
It's all happening now because the Thames is still a very busy river. Some of the world's biggest ships come up here. And these vessels, they've only got about half a metre between them and the riverbed beneath them.
With even bigger ships soon due to come up the Thames, the channel needs to be deepened. In a huge operation, the Port of London Authority has surveyed the main channel, and our wrecks lie directly in its path. They must be removed. Before the wrecks are destroyed, archaeologists are hoping to discover details about the ships, find personal items, and hopefully salvage wreckage from the bottom. But it's a challenging task. They've only got a very short window between the tides, often as little as 40 minutes, to recover what they can. And what's worse, down there it's almost zero visibility. They're trying to do all this in the dark. Anything they find, however small, might help them understand these wrecks better and the history behind them. And they're doing it all against the clock. With marine archaeology so expensive, they can't lift everything. They have limited time on each wreck. The first of our 3 wrecks lies in the estuary, 3 miles east of Southend Pier.
Some 10 metres underneath the water here is a wreck about which practically nothing is known. We do know that she's wooden, and divers pulled a few bits of pottery off her, so she's called the Pottery Wreck.
They found the pottery on a dive a few years ago, but with the clearance work starting soon, everything in the dredger's path needs to be removed. This is their last chance to find out if there's anything down there of historic interest. While the diver gets ready on the salvage craft, they're setting up what's called an airlift.
The diver's able to move around this nozzle on the seabed like a giant vacuum cleaner.
Absolutely. He's even got a little handle. You can control it or you can switch it off if need be.
So that's like a power setting.
Absolutely, yeah.
We know there's going to be loads of mud and water. What are you looking for here as the archaeologist?
Anything that is significant to the wreck. So any artifact that could be wood, material, pottery, personal items from the crew of the wreck.
So taking this vacuum cleaner to the wreck and bringing up the pottery, see, it's quite drastic for a pottery wreck, isn't it?
Yeah, it's called the pottery wreck. There's only been a couple of pieces of pottery come out, which has been called the pottery wreck because we don't actually know what the wreck is or what its name is.
So no danger of Ming vases tumbling out the end of the vacuum cleaner.
I'll let you know if they do.
Underwater, the diver is getting the airlift into position, moving this huge pipe along the wreck in pitch darkness. Once he's got it in place, it's ready to go. The airlift may be a bit crude, but it's surprisingly effective.
Coal. We've got a lot of coal from the side. There's pottery.
Hey! The pottery wreck.
Here's a bit of pottery. More pottery.
Excellent.
Which is, look at that.
Oh, fits. You're like a jigsaw master, look at that. So while all that's going on over there, on the other end of the hose, Graham the diver is down there on the seabed, excavating the wreck. Now hopefully, in a little while, it'll be clear enough for us to pass some strops underneath and lift a whole section of the ship out of the water and put it onto deck right here for us to have a look at.
The salvage crew move the airlift out of the way, and the lifting gear goes into the water for the diver to attach to the wreck. Stuart Leather from Wessex Archaeology is hoping they'll lift more artefacts that shed new light on this mysterious vessel.
Okay, Stu, lots of action on deck. What's going on?
Right, so we're going to go down, we're going to strop the wreck. There's a strong possibility that we could break this wreck because she's very delicate and fragile. So during the lift, we've got to try and get as many strops on her as possible and get as much mud away from the hull so that she'll lift cleanly from the riverbed.
How much of the wreck will come up remains to be seen. Down on the riverbed, the diver is working against the clock to get the strops round something big before the tides beat him. If he's not careful, he could easily be swept away, or even thrown against the wreckage. Eventually the lines crack with tension, and it's clear that something substantial is on the other end. Only a large chunk of the vessel could cause such a strain on the cables. But suddenly the tension on the winch is lost, and the load feels much lighter.
Ah, what a shame.
Eventually part of the ship begins to emerge, but it's much less than they expected.
Well, as we thought, bits of it have fallen off what we've lifted off the seabed. It's pretty hard for the divers to get everything attached properly. We'll just have to take a closer look when it's down on the deck and really work out what we're looking at. Stu, there's a lot less of it than we thought there'd be, but it's kind of interesting.
There is, isn't it? You can see these sort of several layers of the keel plank here. This is the keel.
What did the diver feel like he had?
Well, as I say, the diver thought he had a complete keel section. Obviously, during the lift, it looks as though this is actually a separate section, and I'm not sure what of yet. To tell what this vessel is, we need more of the shipwreck. This doesn't really tell us entirely what we need to know.
Despite the setback, the results from the airlift have given us some interesting finds to follow up.
So the wood hasn't been able to tell us a whole lot. Now, we had a whole load of coal come up as well, didn't we? What can we say about the coal?
Well, coal, we've had a lot of coal from this site. And again, it's a bit of a mystery. I can't quite work it out why there is so much coal coming off. And look at it, it's all type of coal. Look at the texture of it. It's all the same sort of stuff. Really nice. I'd like to take this home really to my home fire. You know, it's that sort of material. It's beautiful.
Yeah, but we don't know why she was carrying it.
So what is this coal? Cargo or fuel? And what about this strange little lump?
This is a mixture of iron, leather and bits of canvas.
This is beautiful. This is absolutely beautiful. Actually, the more I look at it, the more fantastic it is. Look at this piece of leather. Look how this leather goes round here, then widens out, and then there's this hole here, right? Right, and then look, this piece of wood here, yeah? And what this is a sailor's palm. It's just a palm thimble. So what you have had is, you'd have put that hole, you put your thumb through the hole, yeah? And then this piece of wood here would have actually rested in the palm of your hand, yeah? And with that piece of wood, you would actually push the needle through the sailcloth. This is very much the tool of the rigger.
This sailor's palm helps us understand a little bit more about the boat. It suggests there might have been a sail on board. We asked sailmaker James Lawrence if he could shed any more light on the use of this unique tool.
All the crew would be adept at repairing sails, and so any of the crew would have their own palm anyway. Just like a pair of shoes, it's going to take the shape of your foot. You put it on and you get some nice light sewing work, and you sew with that for a day whilst the palm dry on your hand, and then it's the perfect shape. I can work with that forever. That's a tough old thing, you see.
But the coal is a mystery. It may well have been used for heating, but small wooden boats like our pottery wreck generally didn't have heaters on them. And what about the pottery that gave the wreck its nickname? Historian Tessa Dunlop went to see Lorraine Mepham, the finds specialist at Wessex Archaeology, who's been studying it in the hope that it can tell us something about the ship.
This is an example of what might be a large cup, or perhaps more probably what we term a porringer. In other words, it's a small bowl with a handle on the side, used for individual servings of food, probably hot food.
A porringer? I've not heard of one of those before.
Yes, it's a specific term that we use to describe these small bowls, which appeared during the medieval period and then were in use for several centuries after. But I have to say that that's probably quite a late example. I would date this to the 19th century.
Why?
Well, there's something about the fineness of the clay and the glaze finish. It's a very thick, even glaze and quite a fine clay.
If this was a functioning porringer, I'm assuming on board it was for, what, porridge? Or
yes, it could easily have been, yes.
Stovies or something?
Yes.
And hot and warm.
So we know we're looking at a 19th century ship with some form of cooking on board. And a porringer, which must have belonged to one of the crew. Our mystery wreck might not be a grand ship of the seas, but it's these ordinary boats that tell us about life on the Thames and the bygone era. While Tessa continues to search for more clues about this little vessel, I'm back on the dive boat in the middle of the estuary with a wreck that's an entirely different proposition.
Just up ahead lies the wreck of the Dunnby. Now, the Dunnby was a three-masted sailing bark, a beautiful cargo ship that quite literally sailed around the world.
The Dunnby was one of those impressive tall sailing ships that crisscrossed the oceans in the 19th century, bringing all manner of goods and materials to Britain and Europe. These ships are rare now, so finding something from one of these great global traders would be exciting. On her last voyage, the Duvenby was carrying a cargo of guano, or bird droppings, from Tierra de Lobos in Peru to Antwerp when the First World War broke out.
One of the interesting things about 1914 is that when the Duvenby sets off from Peru, there isn't a problem. When she gets into the English Channel, there's a full-scale war on and the world has turned upside down. And they know nothing of this. They set off from Peru, they sailed around Cape Horn, lovely, straightforward, ocean-going voyage, and when you reach the other end, the world has turned completely bonkers.
Her cargo of guano wasn't just prized for fertilizer. It could be used as a key ingredient to make gunpowder. With the outbreak of the First World War, after Belgium was invaded by the Germans, the Duvenby's cargo was impounded when she docked at Falmouth. Instead of heading for Antwerp, the Duvenby was towed around the south coast to London, but she got no further than the Thames estuary. On the morning of the 6th of November 1914, she was engulfed in a dense pea soup of London fog. The Dutch steamship Sindoro struck the Duvenby and cut a 20-foot slice port bow. She sank in just 3 minutes. One crew member, the helmsman, lost his life in the freezing waters. Out at the Duvenby wreck site, the survey boat is taking readings to establish a better picture of the size of this majestic Victorian vessel. The data will allow the team to get a sense of what's on the riverbed. I met Stuart Leather to look at the results.
On the seabed, exactly. So it's each point here is measuring a depth on the seabed. And, you can
And
see
the colours of the different depths.
Yeah, different depth areas, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we're in the
really
channel, as we can see here.
Yeah.
And then we've got something sticking out.
Well, this is the Duvenby. Quite clearly see a shipwreck. You see these huge blue sort of rings coming off here, off actually each end of the ship.
Yeah.
These are actually scour marks. So as the tide's been rushing up and down the Thames for the last sort of, since 1914, it's been hollowing out the seabed around the sort of each end of this wreck, yeah. So if we look at the length, it's an amazing programme, isn't it? It's beautiful, gives a real idea of what we're dealing with. It's about 80 metres.
Incredible.
Isn't that fantastic? And then we can actually look at the width of the wreck. Yeah, about 25, 30 metres. And look at that. The ship actually just emerges out of the riverbed. It's just absolutely phenomenal.
With its tall masts, the wreck of the Duvenby has been a potential risk to shipping ever since she sank. So dive teams have, in the past, used explosives and cutting equipment to break up and disperse the wreck. But with the proposed shipping channel, the remains of the Duvenby must now be destroyed. As the dive teams get prepared, the archaeologists know that this is a rare opportunity to recover something from this great ship of empire. Armed with the name Duvenby and the date she sank, Tessa's trying to find out more about her final days. And her starting point is the Lloyd's Register of Shipping in central London.
The Lloyd's Register of Shipping was first established to help underwriters and shipbrokers and owners assess commercial risk and also negotiate their insurance rates. And hopefully it's on this register that we'll be able to find the name of the owner of our bark, the Duvenby.
Each year, Lloyd's registers and classifies every ship that's in service. So the Duvenby should appear in the records between the time she was built and the year she sank.
Now this is the 1913-1914 Lloyd's Register of Shipping sailing vessels. So with any luck, we'll find the Duvenby in here. C.D. Duvenby. Found her entry 182 Duvenby, a steel bark, this tells us, tonnage 1,653 tons, so a reasonable size. Further along we have the name of the boatyard who built her, Pickersgill and Sons, in Sunderland, and here we have her owners, P. Iredale and Porter Limited, some kind of partnership, and they were based in Liverpool.
When the Duvenby was built in 1891, London and Liverpool were the largest ports in the world. They were the gateways for trade. Thousands of jobs depended on them and fortunes were made. It was a time when Britannia ruled the waves.
The British Empire was the largest, the most successful and the most dynamic empire on earth, but it was primarily a trading network, not an empire of possession people. And to connect up that empire required an enormous fleet of ships. So Britain was the home of the world shipping industry in terms of insurance, in terms of markets, in terms of shipbuilding, officer training, manpower recruiting. Everywhere around the world were British-built ships with British men carrying the trade of the world in the commercial interests of the British.
While Tessa tries to find out more about the ship and its owners, the team is preparing to dive to the bottom to see what they can bring to the surface. The wreck is 15 meters down in the dark, murky waters of the Thames estuary. It's the largest wreck we're looking for. Here, with the tides and swirling undercurrents, the team begins their hunt for clues. Tessa's research has led her to Angus Fraser, the only remaining great-grandson of Peter Iredale, one of the owners of the Dovenby.
Hi, Angus.
Tessa, how do you do? Good to see you. Do come in, please. And I've got a watercolour.
So this is your great-grandfather?
This is one of my great-grandfathers. That's Peter Iredale.
He's a fearsome-looking man, wasn't he?
That's a painting probably done in his late 30s there.
And looking quite the Victorian gent. He's sort of made it by this stage.
Well, not in terms of... He started his career. He hasn't actually started amassing money, because he was probably only 35 or 40 at that time.
But already connected with
shipping.
Maritime.
Yes, indeed.
At the beginning of his career, Peter Iredale worked for other ship owners as an agent in West Africa, negotiating palm oil shipments to Liverpool. He eventually earned enough money to buy a share in his first ship.
At his peak, and I don't know what year that was in, I think the most number of ships, the large number of ships we ever had at any one time of their own, was about 27 or 28.
God, that's quite something.
There are several books written by people who were at sea in which he is mentioned, and his ships are mentioned. Some of them are somewhat less than complimentary.
Oh, really?
Well, yes, there are various describing a bit of a skin fence and so on.
Well, be careful with his money.
Oh, yes.
I suppose that's how he ended up with a fleet of ships.
Well, yes, and allegedly fed his seamen on outdated Royal Navy rations, which I gather was not that uncommon those days. Well, he had to make a profit indeed.
So scurvy ahoy. Do we have a picture of it anywhere, the Dovenby?
Here we are. Here's Dovenby.
Extremely good-looking.
Not bad. And here's another one of her, and there she is at rest.
Oh, with her very distinct three masts.
With the Thames being the gateway to London, there are hundreds of wrecks scattered throughout the river and the estuary. Some, like the Dovenby, are well documented. But others, like our so-called pottery wreck, are a complete mystery. The dive team were disappointed not to have raised more of this wreck on their last dive, and have returned to the site in the hope of getting better results this time. While the salvage crew gets the deck ready, the diver makes his way to the bottom to wrap bigger cables around the wreck. They want to lift as much as they can without it falling apart. Soon, bits of wood emerge from the darkness.
Down again.
Okie doke, coming down.
At first glance, they look like the ribs of the boat.
Okay, got it on deck.
Yeah, we wanted your help here.
Yeah, well, got to get my mind round it a bit. I mean, this is presumed to be the stern. The keel's tapering down in this direction. These are obviously frame timbers, well battered and very old, and very curved. You can see the hand saw mark still surviving on that face from pit sawing the timber out. So we know it's not a medieval timber or something like that, where they didn't use pit saws for converting the timber then. But it's the shape here that's quite interesting to me, because I think that could be coming from towards the stern, and I'm beginning to get an idea what kind of vessel it might be, because the stern ends of the local fishing boats, the Borleys, they had a wide square stern or transom, and then they had quite a sharp back end. If you hold that just like that, because this here, this timber here, looks like it ought to be part of a stern post. We'll put this down there. That's the... Now that would fit about there, and this it's obviously going to fit on there, so that would fit in like that. Now you're not going to be able to hold it there, but that's how it would fit. If I get this oak frame timber here, I have a feeling that this one would have originally have been quite close to that one. I think we get these to overlap, something like that.
And this is what she would have looked like, a Borley boat, or small fishing vessel, that was used in the Thames estuary and beyond.
Hey, Wendy.
The archaeologists have solved their first mystery. But what about the crew who sailed her?
Most small fishing boats were family owned and family operated. Quite often you'd find that one family would own shares in 2 or 3 boats, and this is really a basic form of insurance. If one boat was lost, they hadn't lost everything, they still had shares in other boats. If you didn't fish, you didn't earn any money, and if you didn't earn any money, you didn't eat, and so you had to go. The most prolific fishing, of course, is done in winter, when the weather is worse, but the boats were inherently unsafe and unsound in that they were open boats. They didn't have life jackets or lifeboats or any of the modern aids that we have today.
It could well have been bad weather that caused our Borley to sink. It would only need a swell of 4 foot to cause the crew of just 3 men real danger and the loss of their day's catch.
Generally, the market was a local market. The fish were caught in small quantities and sold in local fish shops or in the street or to the local populace. The advent of railways dramatically changed how fishing worked throughout the country.
Suddenly, fresh fish and seafood could be eaten anywhere, not just at the seaside. The only problem was that fresh shrimps, one of the mainstays of the Borley fishermen, didn't keep very long, especially on a Victorian steam train. The solution was simple.
Well, the whole idea was obviously to catch the shrimps and, while they were very, very fresh, i.e. still alive, to boil them.
So the crew set up a cooking stove, or copper, on board ship to cook the shrimps before they even got ashore. This explains why our divers found coal on the wreck site. But what about the porringer?
If you're working on board a fishing boat, what you're going to have ready to hand to eat is going to be fish. And they're boiling up the shrimp as the Borley boats were. At the end of your boil, you've got, in effect, a stock. And I'm sure many of the blokes would have eaten that. They would have dunked bread in it. They would have used it as a sort of soup, in the same way that you would eat fish soup today.
So we've worked out the identity of this unknown wreck, which turns out to be a Borley, a type of fishing vessel. But the Thames is littered with hundreds of mystery wrecks, and our next site is another one.
We're heading to a site that's affectionately known as the unknown site, wooden planks and concretion. It was first discovered in 1996 by the report of a fisherman who got his nets fastened on the seabed. So that often means that there's something on the bottom. So we've got a lot of survey data, geophysical survey data, that suggests that the wreck is about 16 metres long. So we're talking about between 50 and 60 foot long. So not a big ship, but a substantial wooden vessel.
As the divers descend into darkness, they need to be careful not to get their airlines tangled in the maze of debris on the wreck.
Do you want me to start climbing towards the back?
Yeah, affirmative, Graham, affirmative.
With only the size to go by, there's nothing else known for certain about this ship. It could be anything. The date is completely unknown. However old the wreck is, it will have its own unique story to tell. But first the diver has to find it, and even for someone with years of experience, this is easier said than done.
Left bottom.
Left bottom. Diver left bottom!
In the impossibly dark conditions, the diver literally feels his way around the wreckage. 20 minutes later, he comes up with some real results.
The diver's been very successful indeed. We've recovered 3 key artefacts which give us an idea about the date of this wreck. So we've recovered a flagon, a plate and a brick. And all these things point towards a shipwreck that dates to the middle to the late 19th century. We've got artefacts from this boat now which tells us something, just a little something about the people that were running that boat. Because it's about 60 foot long, it could be any sort of sailing vessel or small cargo vessel that may have been doing small local trade. It's not grand, it's not something that society had produced for status. It's something that ordinary people would have been working on, earning their living from and running. And that's really, for me, that makes it more interesting. It tells us something about everyday life on the water.
To find out more about the jar, Tessa went to Greenwich Heritage Centre to meet local historian Francis Ward.
So Francis, this is one of our latest finds, very exciting. It's a jar, as you can see in here, F. White, and then Crown and Anchor Hotel, High Street, Woolwich.
Fantastic.
So I was hoping you could help us locate this individual and possibly his hotel.
Right, well let's start with the hotel, shall we, because that's the easiest one to do.
Okay.
This is a map of 1853 with Woolwich High Street running across the corner here.
It's a busy old place.
It certainly is, and right in the middle of the High Street there is the Crown and Anchor Tavern. So you can see it's a very substantial building, big building.
Yes,
but
look at that compared to that pub.
Or
It's
look
much
at some of
bigger.
these little ones over here, tiny little things.
There's so many pubs. I can't get over how many. There's like a sort of cluster.
Well, this is a very industrialised area. Just off the map at that end, you've got Woolwich Arsenal, which was producing armaments for the government and employing hundreds and hundreds of men. Just off the map at this end, you've got the Royal Dockyard at Woolwich, again employing hundreds of men. And then you've got all these wharfs and things going along the riverside here, all very hard, strenuous work. The men who were employed there would get incredibly thirsty. Where you and I would open the fridge and have a glass of water, the cold drink for them is beer.
Woolwich today might not be the same hive of activity, but for hundreds of years it was one of the most important locations on the entire river. Its gentle sloping foreshore was ideal ground for the construction of generous slipways, and it was within easy reach of the Tower of London, the original home of the Royal Armouries.
Back in the Tudor period, Henry VIII established 2 major facilities at Woolwich. An arsenal where he made guns and tested them because the river was long enough to fire the guns up the river, and a dockyard where he built many of his biggest ships. Woolwich was a critical centre of English naval power, and right the way through to the mid-19th century, Woolwich remained central as the arsenal for artillery production and the shipyard building and maintaining ships.
Sustaining this enormous facility created numerous service industries, everything from shipwrights to chandlers to lodging houses and pubs. Having established the location of the Crown and Anchor on the map, Tessa and Francis want to follow up on the other information on the jar.
And what about our landlord?
Now,
White.
That's a bit more difficult because these people tend to be a bit fly-by-night. But if we have a look in one of these directories, it's a bit like the Yellow Pages before there was the telephone.
So it's addresses,
yes,
names.
That's right. If you wanted to find out where your nearest pub was, this is what you'd reach for.
After looking through several directories, we discovered that F. White was the resident landlord at the Crown and Anchor between 1851 and 1867. At this time, Woolwich was a boom town, and it gives us an idea of what was going on when our crew walked up the slipway in search of refreshment.
I think he's probably come into Woolwich for some reason or another, gone to the nearest pub, got a carry-out takeaway to take back on his boat and enjoy on the high seas.
And what kind of vessel would it have been? Generally, what kind of vessels were pulling?
Thames barges would come in here.
Okay.
Because that's what they were built to do. The Thames barge is a very specialised boat. It's built to come into places like Woolwich, and generally they'd bring in coal and hay. Coal to heat people's homes, hay to feed the horses.
So it seems like our unknown wreck is a Thames barge. These were the backbone of London's supply network and supported the daily needs of an expanding Victorian population.
They were the workhorses of the river, the short-haul flights of their day, if you like. Local traffic bringing hay, coal, wheat, people, gunpowder, even post into central London. And actually, at the end of the 19th century, there were over 2,500 of them, whereas now there's not even 100.
The few remaining are the treasured possessions of a handful of enthusiasts who gather annually to race and display their historic vessels. But the history of sailing barges on the Thames goes back as far as the origins of London itself.
We know that there were sailing barges from the Roman period that would have carried cargoes from incoming ships to shore. The same in the medieval period when there were also big square-rigged single sow vessels. So there is a tradition, but the what you would call the strict sort of Thames sailing barge as we know it today is really a product of the last 450 odd years.
If you take a great port like London, there are all sorts of different levels of trading activity on the river. And we, you know, if we think of it, we think immediately of the big shipping lines and stuff like that. But you have to realise that in percentage terms, in terms of the number of vessels, it's the small boats. You know, it's the Thames sailing barges that perform really crucial work for the maintenance, for the supply of things to the city.
So while our barge that tied up in Woolwich wasn't one of the biggest ships to sail up the Thames, it was an important part of the economy. Just like our international ship of empire, the Dovenby. The remains of this classic sailing ship now lie broken on the riverbed. As one of a small number of surviving steel sailing barks from this period, the archaeologists know that this is their last chance to find anything of historic interest that will give them an insight into late 19th century shipbuilding. Although today's weather started out well, it's deteriorating fast and making conditions difficult for the dive team.
The reports coming up is that we've got a cylindrical tube about 5 metres long, is that right?
That's right, yeah. So the diver's gone down, he's found this cylindrical tube about 5 metres long. So obviously there's been a bit of a guesswork. It could be a bit of mast or a bit of rigging, but really we don't know at this stage.
But it could be a mast?
It could be a mast. We really don't know at this stage.
Well, I've got my fingers crossed for that.
I'm sure you have, Frank. Yeah, and it could be.
We've started to lower the wire down to you, all right?
Yeah, wonder that. There's all sorts down here though, Kevin.
As he gropes his way around in the dark, the diver manages to secure long strops around the section they think might be the mast. When he's safely back on board, the crane begins its lift. But suddenly, the whole operation grinds to a halt. Whatever's on the end is so heavy, they need a stronger winch.
What's the problem? Because we thought we were bringing it up and it's But it's stuck now, right?
Well, that's right. So obviously, it's until you start lifting, you don't really appreciate what the load is on all the lifting gear on the winches.
Because the guy can't see anything.
He can't see anything, so he's doing it all by touch. And obviously, as you lift it and it starts moving, you get a better idea of whether it's attached or whether it's buried in the seabed and that sort of thing.
The problem now is that whatever's on the end of the lifting gear is stuck in an awkward position. It's jutting right out of the seabed and would present an immediate danger to shipping overhead. What started as an archaeological rescue expedition has turned into a nightmare scenario.
He's pulled the mast and it's sitting up out of the ground. Now that could be like a can opener for a ship coming past.
Exactly.
It all feels very open here, but actually we're in the middle of quite a narrow channel.
We are in the middle of the main shipping channel going into the Thames.
Time is running out. With the tide on the turn, they must complete the operation in the next few minutes. Somehow they've got to recover this huge object from the riverbed. I'd love to be down there right now to see what's going on, but the visibility is zero. To imagine what the ship might look like, a short while ago I went to dive another similar wreck in clearer waters.
Well, we're off the far southwestern corner of Cornwall, and right here is a ship just like the Dovenby. Can't wait to go in and have a look at her.
This ship sank in 1914, the same year as the Dovenby, and was one of those sailing ships that crisscrossed the oceans in the 19th century. But her story is one of tragedy and survival against the odds. This is the wreck of the Hera.
Look at this. This is just fantastic.
Blown onto rocks in a storm, 18 men were drowned when she sank, with only 5 survivors. Just like the Dovenby, the Hera was a steel sailing ship. These were some of the largest and fastest ships of their day, 70 meters long with their masts up to 26 meters high.
This is definitely the mast. Huge. Normally on a steel ship you'd expect to find a huge boiler in the centre. This ship didn't have a boiler. What it had instead were these huge masts and spars.
Having seen the Hera, it would be great if the team could salvage something from the Dovenby. To me, these are the most romantic ships from a bygone era. When the Dovenby sank, she was fully loaded with a cargo of guano. These bird droppings from the other side of the world are rich in nitrates and were the favoured fertiliser of their day. The most productive and best quality guano came from mountainous piles on rainless islands off the South American coast. In the 19th century, the British had the monopoly on Peruvian guano. It was the money-spinning product of its time, bringing untold wealth to those who traded it. Sailing barks like the Dovenby and her crew braved the deadly waters of Cape Horn to deliver the precious commodity back home, just like these men did, undertaking the same journey around the Horn in the 1920s. During her 23-year career, the Dovenby regularly sailed from Liverpool to Australia, to North and South America, crossing some of the worst seas in the world. She'd carry all manner of cargoes, from steel railway lines and coal to guano and wheat, a never-ending circle of supply and demand. The Davonby was part of a long tradition of ships bringing the world to our doorstep. This global trade affected every facet of our society.
One of the things that having a maritime trading empire gives you is access to a whole range of ways of seeing the rest of the world. So cargoes like tea, china, silk, they're coming from the other side of the world. They're changing the way people eat, drink, dress. They're getting rid of old standards like earthenware crockery, like woolen clothes. People go for luxuries, new forms of consumption, new tastes in art.
Ships were arriving in London from all over the world to offload their cargoes. This economy was sustaining thousands of people in the Docklands area. And all that trade, the ships and the goods, had to go somewhere.
By 1800, trade into the port had virtually tripled. And with this booming economy came a series of new problems. For instance, 1,700 ships were using a piece of water intended originally for about 550. Add to that 3,500 barges and you have serious gridlock. Ships had to wait days, sometimes even weeks, to find a vacant berth. And of course, while they were waiting, they weren't making any money.
You get this enormous explosion in dock building. And there are three major docks that are built on the north side of the River Thames. The first to open is the West India dock, and that, obviously, the West India trade is what comes in there. That's all the sugar from the West Indies, all the rum, mahogany, cargoes like that. And then there's the East India dock at Blackwall, and that's handling all the trade from the East Indies. And then there's the London dock at Wapping, which handles all the trade from the Americas, from Virginia, so it's handling all the tobacco. It also has a monopoly on the handling of wines and spirits.
By the end of the 19th century, dock companies kept special sample rooms to show the wide variety of their imports to visiting wholesale merchants.
On these shelves alone, it's just one vast array of different teas. China tea, gunpowder tea from China, the name says it all really. There's something sort of romantic and fairy story-like about these bottles. And here again, more to tantalise our taste buds. Every single spice and herb, cloves, white pepper, cinnamon flowers, French teasel seed. And it wasn't just edibles. I mean, this is beautiful mother of pearl. Britain was suddenly becoming a consumer's paradise, and London at the very heart of that process.
By the time the Davonby was built, London was the biggest and busiest port in the world, dealing with 8.5 million tons of cargo every year. By this time, ships had become so big that the channels along the Thames needed deepening. This process of dredging started 100 years ago and has continued ever since. Today, the Port of London Authority has made a painstaking survey to check for anything of historic importance before proceeding with the dredge. And down in the estuary, the archaeological team is carrying out another dive on our unknown wreck that Tessa investigated in Woolwich.
So far, we know that our Thames barge tied up at Woolwich and the crew picked up that jar from the Crown and Anchor. We've since found out that the jar was actually designed for gin. It's pretty potent stuff for a carry-out. Let's hope that wasn't the cause of their watery demise.
To continue their search for artifacts and clues about the men on board the barge, the dive team are fixing up another airlift. Who knows what they might find?
Down on the airlift.
The first surprise is that masses of flint are pouring out of the airlift. This could mean that the cargo of this barge was building materials. On the riverbed, there's another surprise. The divers found some intriguing and fragile finds which he's bringing to the surface.
So can you sort of put all of it in a bag, in the state it's in?
Oh yeah, I can do that.
So what size bag do you want? Something bigger than the one we sent down before?
Yeah.
Oh, very good. He's got something in his hand. Okie doke. He's got something in his hand, Al.
And that's not all.
Oh, that's beautiful, Simon. Absolutely beautiful.
And obviously, the bag in one hand, I'm pushing myself against the bloody wreck to get in position. I get bloody rope around my block of the helmet. And it's just current just puts me all over the place. And it's just like.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You've done well. We can go back there tomorrow. But these pieces are yeah worth their weight in gold.
Right,
That's fantastic.
so the first bag you sent me down, that was full.
That's full, is it?
That's full.
Oh, brilliant.
And that's. Thank you.
So what's that on then?
That's on the airlift.
That's on
because
the
I just had to get it out of my way.
Right. Okay.
Hang on there.
There's a bag on the airlift to keep it nice and gentle on the recovery. Yes.
You got the.
There's another one.
Cork in. More plates.
Tomorrow they have one final chance to retrieve as much as possible from the wreck site of this Thames barge. As the divers go through their hoard of the crew's personal possessions, we can get a glimpse into the daily lives of these men. But how many would have been on board when she sank?
The average size barge, the small to medium barge, is designed for a crew of 2, and I've sailed a long way with just 2 of us, and it is blinking hard work, and you've got to think a long way ahead. But then the Victorians, or the late Victorians, were extremely stocky and strong, and I've sort of proved myself they needed to be. Yeah, no radios, no weather forecasts, no motor pumps, no nothing, no radar. In fog you anchored, and you hope that nothing hits you. If you're anchored somewhere in an exposed place, then you sounded a bell. But there were lots of accidents.
Could the infamous London smog have been a factor in the fate of our Thames barge? Back at the wreck site, the divers are underway on their final attempt to reclaim anything of historic interest.
So yesterday we found some amazing pieces, and we're starting to get an idea of who was sailing on this boat.
And with the airlift in full flow, there's yet more flint. But there's also some other intriguing items coming up.
Right, that's brilliant. Right, you carry on then. It's another old one, eh? Amazing. It's funny how you always seem to find shoes on shipwrecks. Something about the fact that the leather is cured so hard, but they're very charismatic somehow. It makes you feel like, I don't know, dead man's shoes.
It's looking like this was definitely a barge that sank in the 1850s or 60s, carrying building materials into London. But the diver has also been trawling the wreck for other clues and personal items.
Oh, look at that!
Do you think that was his shovel? It's like a W.
It looks like a W, and that looks like
a G.
G, yeah. WG, maybe. Or D even, a very ornate D, WD.
To find these items on the last day's dive has been a real success for the team. They bring a poignant connection to the men who worked on the Thames 150 years ago. The owners of these black leather boots, the shovels and their inscriptions, are secrets that the Thames will keep to herself forever. The possessions of the Dovenby's crew remain on the riverbed, but the team still need to lift a large object from the wreck site. Their last attempt to raise something from this elegant ship of empire failed. But now they're hoping that a new winch and heavier gauge cable will solve their earlier problems and haul it free. The question is, will the team succeed this time?
Well, I'm a bit I'm a bit speechless actually. That's phenomenal, isn't it? That's we've got half the Dovenby there, really.
The winchman was saying, well, it's a little bit heavy, but look at
Yeah, that's right. The diver reporting a 5 metre sort of cylindrical object. That didn't quite... That's not what I expected. And no wonder the winch was struggling. That's phenomenal, isn't it? Oh, we just get a bit of a closer look here. We've got a lot going on there. That's incredible.
Looks loose, man.
It does look loose. It looks as though, yeah, it'd be quite nice to get another bit of wire on there.
This is absolutely amazing. It's been quite a dramatic few minutes. This piece of metal's way heavier than we thought it would be. Turns out that instead of just a little bit of mast that we were expecting, we've got an enormous, great circular object. And I forgot that we're talking about a 70-metre long sailing ship. It's even bigger than I thought it was down there. Half of it was in the water.
But the most incredible thing, look, Frank, you see this bit of cable coming here? That's actually part of the structure. That's part of the rigging, I think. It's incredible that it's come up sort of intact after all these years. Absolutely phenomenal.
You're much more cautious than me. I'm screaming mast.
Yeah, no, well, yeah, it is looking like that, admittedly, but it's a phenomenal bit of section, isn't it? Absolutely incredible, and the size of it is just breathtaking.
It's got to be. I mean, even though she was a big ship, even this has got to be down at the base of the mast. Quite apart from anything else, it must be lethal diving down there with no visibility. Look how sharp all those edges are.
Absolutely. The diver's done an amazing job, hasn't he, to actually identify that bit of section, get enough wire around it for us to lift it. You know, it's absolutely incredible.
It's so charismatic, you know, you just think of this was the mast that carried the sails.
Of one of the most, you know, elegant sailing barks that we've seen, really, you know, something that represents the last part of the sailing era, really, before steam sort of kicked in. Absolutely, it's incredible.
It's also a bit sad, isn't it? You know, you think of the beautiful lines of that vessel and the elegance of it, and now you've got this
and this rusted, is what you've got. You've got a tangled mess on the seabed. That's what you've got. Yeah, it's very emotive, very emotive, very emotional.
This is what the mast would have looked like. It's 48 metres of steel, the durable material of the Industrial Revolution, and it's the main mast of the Stadsrad Lemkel, which is a 3-masted steel bark very similar to our vessel, the Dovenby.
In these dives and salvage operations, the archaeologists have been able to find remnants of vessels like the Dovenby and discover something of their past. Time has now run out, but they've given us new insights into the history of this mighty river. The Thames has always been a river with many uses. Fishing boats mingle with pleasure craft, tugs with huge container ships. In these films, we've been witness to a unique operation which has uncovered forgotten parts of our maritime heritage. We've told the story of warships like the HMS London, a ship that transformed our nation and helped restore the monarchy. 60 years ago, a different type of warship worked the Thames, with small boats like the Asia, an ordinary little yacht, helping to keep us free. Below these waters lie many others, over 600 of them. Among them, the Dovenby, a great ship of empire, a barge that helped build Britain, and a boat full of mystery.
These 7 shipwrecks are emblematic of 400 years of maritime history. Who knows how many more will emerge in the years to come, and what new fascinating tales will come up from the murky waters of the Thames.